In the last lesson I talked about combining some power chord shapes, what we call fifth and sixth power chord shapes, to create a simple riff, and then we developed that into a chord progression and we played it through 12 bars. Just a reminder, the simple little riff that we started off with down here in the open position was we moved that around across 3 different string choices to create the progression. So we moved from all staying down in the open position. If you're new to power chords and you haven't seen my previous lesson, recommend checking that out first. I'll put a link down below as ever. What I'm going to do now is develop that further into truly movable power chord combinations that we can use all over the neck, and we're not relying on the open strings. In the last lesson I used the open positions just to make it simpler to get our head around the idea of the chord combinations without having to worry about the stretch. Now we're going to have to do a little bit of a stretch to make the chords work in a true movable position. I'll go into close up and show you how that works, but just to begin with, the one that I started off with, the A shape chord, if you will, I'm going to be playing that in this lesson up here. Same chord, well, same 2 chords even, but I'm using it in what we call a truly movable position, so I'm not relying on open strings. Everything I'm playing is fretted by my fingers. You can probably just about see from here there is a little bit of stretch involved. I will show you how we're going to overcome that and how we're going to use this technique to play the exact same pattern, the exact same progression that we did in the last lesson. So I want to talk about the stretch first of all. I mentioned this in the previous video and in this one. If you're not familiar or comfortable with the idea of stretching your fingers apart like that, this might be something that you want to have a quick look at first. Maybe perhaps even use this as a warm-up before we look at the actual chords. So before I get into the chords, the stretch that we're going to have to do in order to achieve this exercise is we're going to start with our first finger on the 5th fret of our E string, or 6th string, and we're going to have to stretch up to the 9th fret on the same string just to begin with, just to get us used to the stretch. The chord isn't played like this, but just as a quick warm-up exercise, as you can see my other 2 fingers are doing nothing. I'm just using my first finger there on the 5th fret, and I'm going to use my little finger to play the 9th fret. When I'm doing that, I want to keep my first finger anchored there on the 5th finger. I don't want to be skipping up and down like that, because I won't be able to play the chords properly. Just for the exercise, I want to practice keeping the first finger there at all times and stretching up to the 9th fret. You can also practice this across the other strings if you wish. As I say, if you're not used to doing the stretch, this might be a useful warm-up for you. As ever, the last thing you want to do is start playing something and end up causing yourself an injury or hurting your hands. So if it starts to feel uncomfortable, just build it up a couple of reps at a time, just like you go in the gym, and just get used to your hand being that far apart. It'll make sense when we get into the chords. There's no way around these 2 fingers having to be that way apart. I can kind of make a decision on which of these fingers I'm going to use for the other bits of the chord, but these 2 fingers are going to have to be stretched that far in order for these movable chords, these 5th and 6th power chords, to work in the context of this riff. So, assuming now that you're okay with that stretch, you know you're not going to hurt yourself and you can do that cleanly. That's important. It's no good if you're just a bit short. You want to be able to do that cleanly. So assuming you can do that, we'll start with the chords. So the first chord that I played, the A chord, I'm going to start with that one. The previous exercise I did down here in the open position. So when I come to play it in the movable position, I'm going to start, as I said, with my first finger on my 5th fret there, on my 6th string, my E string, and then I'm going to make the power chord, the 5th power chord. If you remember from my other videos, we're going to go to make the power chord. It's 1 string down, 2 frets up, so there's my basic 5th power chord, those two. Now, from my previous video, to make the 6th chord, we need to go further 2 frets up, and that's where the stretch comes in. So keeping this finger, and hopefully this finger as well, in place, I'm going to use my little finger to get up there to the 9th fret to make that stretch. Take a note, in this instance, my second finger here isn't doing anything. It's my 1, 3 and 4 fingers that are doing all the work in this one. And you can see that I'm holding the chord position, my normal 5th chord. And for the 6th chord, I'm applying and lifting off my little finger. It's my 5th chord, my 6th chord, 5th chord, 6th chord. As I mentioned, there's 2 different ways that you can actually finger this, depending on what's comfortable for you. That's my preferred method, using my 1st, 3rd and 4th fingers. You can also do it, if your hand's a different shape, you can use your 1st and 2nd finger to make the power chord, the 5th chord, and then still you're going to have to use your little finger to go up to the 9th fret to make the 6th chord. Sounds exactly the same if I do it this way, or if I use the other finger in. Because my guitar and my amplifier doesn't know which fingers I'm using, I'm just doing what's comfortable for me. In my instance, as I say, that's good for me. If you wish to use your 3rd finger. Personally, I'm just as comfortable using either, but just to get you started off, I would suggest using whichever one of those you feel more comfortable with. And then perhaps once you're happy with the exercise and you've managed to play it through, you could try doing it with alternating the fingers for it to give you a little bit more stretching exercise and using different fingers. So start off with just getting that very first, this A5 and A6 one working. Either that way or this way. Before you progress any further. If need be, stop the video now and come back to it. Make sure you're okay with that. Once you're okay with that, the rest of it is pretty much plain sailing, because all I'm going to do is move that same pattern, that progression, around to different places, hence the name Movable, to create the same progression that I did in the last video, and it'll sound exactly the same. I'll put the sequence of the progression in the description, just so it's there for you to read it if you need to read it, but it's exactly the same. We start with the A, we've got a bit of D, then E, and so on and so forth. So because I'm starting with the A, so I've got my A power chord, if you will, my normal A 5th chord. In my progression, I've also got a D chord, and I'm going to play that just by moving everything across the strings down to my 5th string, my D there, to create my D chord for the chord progression. For my E chord, what I'm going to do is move this one up 2 frets. So I'm starting at my 7th fret. There's my basic 5th chord starting point, and those are the 3 chords of the 12-part progression that I played previously. So if I was just to play them as 5th chords, that's how I would play them. So if you're comfortable with the progression, if you can remember what the A, the D and the E, when to play those, if you're comfortable with the physical part of, I'll put that together and I'll play the same progression as I did in the previous video, but rather than playing in the open position down here, which is a bit easier on the fingers, I'll play the same thing and it'll sound exactly the same, playing it up here in the movable position, starting off with the A and then using the D and the E and back to the other chords. So just to play through. that instance I played using my first and second finger to make the fifth chord. I did say you've got the option, so just to prove it, I'll do the same thing again using my first and third fingers and still my little finger to make it up to the sixth chord. That's the power chords, fifth and sixth chords played in the movable positions. So I did say earlier, but it's really important, so I just want to double stress it again. Be careful with the hand stretching thing. The technical bits, the notes and stuff, that's a bit of a mental exercise, but when you're doing these stretches for the first time, and in the bigger scheme of things, these aren't massive stretches on the guitar, but if you're not used to it, if you're used to just playing with your hand together like that, these stretches can feel quite big. So don't overdo it and don't hurt yourself. I always say to beginner players who are maybe done the first lesson or something, don't go trying to play for hours and hours every day, because the only thing that's going to happen is you'll get blisters on your fingers and then you won't be able to play for a while. Exactly the same thing with the stretching. Imagine it like doing the splits with your legs. You have to work up for it. Do a good warm up first. Maybe play some stuff that you're familiar with, or just have a bit of a move around of your hands first before trying to suddenly come out to a big stretch. Because the last thing that I want, and obviously the last thing that you want, is to be able to hurt your hand trying these exercises that I'm giving you. With a little bit of time, a little bit of practice, even if you've not done it before, these things should be quite playable for you, quite straightforward, and it will unlock an entire world of being able to play these and similar chord combinations and chord progressions up and down all over the neck of the guitar, and you'll be able to play all kinds of songs just by using these simple techniques. So, as ever, enjoy.